Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Writers and Fighters. This is the podcast where I interview either a writer of some kind or somebody involved in combat sports. I'm your host, AJ Ortega, and today I'm going to recap the UFC 259 event from last night and also interview award-winning writer and bookstore owner Jennifer Murvin. Jennifer and I discussed why she started writing, a little bit about her writing process and how COVID has affected that. We talk a little bit about a graphic piece she wrote and published in Anomaly, a literature journal. And we talk about the importance of place and home in her writing. Tells us a little bit about opening and operating Pagination Bookshop in Springfield, Missouri. And then we finish up with her telling us a little bit about televised boxing being present in her childhood. Speaking of boxing, Claressa Shields fought over the weekend. She's a boxer, the best women's boxer right now. And she's a two-time Olympic gold medalist. And over the weekend, she solidified herself as the greatest women's boxer because she has two undisputed titles in two weight classes. Undisputed meaning she has all the big belts in those divisions, the WBA, WBO, WBC, IBF. And there's a conversation about the lack of competition for her. She won decisively in a decision, and so there's not a lot of women left for her to fight in the boxing world. She's just that dominant. There is conversations about her moving into mixed martial arts, which I think is really interesting and probably the move right now. She's under contract with Professional Fighters League, and I guess they're trying to have her fight in June. I don't know if that's still the plan, to be honest. Professional Fighters League used to be World Series of Fighting, and they do like that weird point system, kind of like a tournament, and there's like seasons. It's odd, but it's a good place to start. There's people that start their careers there, then folks that end it there as well. But high caliber people up there in their latter stage of their careers, like Anthony Pettis or Rory McDonald, come to mind. So, it's a legit organization and is probably the right move for somebody like Claressa Shields coming from the boxing world, going into the MMA world. You don't want to just throw her into the UFC with the Sharks because it's a completely different sport, though she has a tremendous base for it. Last year, I saw that she was training at Jackson Winklejohn, which is where John Jones trains and also where Holly Holm trains, which I think is, again, super smart because Holly Holm, great MMA fighter, but a tremendous boxer. Again, a world champion boxer herself that was able to make the transition into the MMA world, ultimately going into the UFC. And we all know what happened when, she beat up Ronda Rousey and really just kind of changed the game there. And so I can't think of a better camp that has an example of somebody moving from boxing into the MMA world and having such success like Holly Holm has through Jackson Winklejohn. And so that's the right move, I think. And also Holly Holm didn't just jump into the UFC. She didn't. She did regional promotions, a Bellator fight before she joined the UFC. And so I think that's the smart move, career-wise, is to kind of get your chops in some of these maybe mid-tier kind of leagues and organizations and then move into, wanting to fight for the UFC eventually. I think that's a real possibility. And mostly, again, because Claressa Shields is 25 years old. So I think I just want to address her win and her dominance in boxing and that conversation of where's the competition? Well, as we know in combat sports, a lot of the competition has gone to mixed martial arts. And especially for a woman in boxing where the women in boxing just don't get promoted. We know that. Claressa Shields has gone on record complaining about that. You can just Google it. And it's true. And UFC 259 featured, one of the best women's combat athletes to ever walk the planet in Amanda Nunes. And so there's money there it's possible to market women's fighting at the level of men's fighting. Boxing doesn't have their stuff together. mixed martial arts is doing a good job. Still room to grow, of course. But when you have somebody like Amanda Nunes being one of the best combat athletes, period, like there's the proof. Like it can be done. There is a demand. There are qualified women that are amazing at what they do. And so I think that's a promising move for Claressa Shields and would like to see what her MMA career looks like. Speaking of MMA, let's move into the UFC recap. Just going to recap the last 3 fights because they were the championship fights, although there was a whole bunch of other good ones in the undercard and prelims. So in the Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan fight, that one was a weird one. It ended in disqualification, and Sterling won, by disqualification and ends up getting the belt under really, not ideal circumstances. First time that's happened, the title changing hands through a disqualification. At the beginning, I was impressed with the referee until I wasn't. Mark Smith. I was actually about to tweet that he was in on the action and giving good, clear vocal warnings and reminders throughout. It was just, I thought he was doing his job and he was on it. Little things I noticed. But at one point, again, this is like round 4, the moment of the disqualification happens something like this. So Sterling is crouched at one point, and he has a knee down. And so the referee, Mark Smith, says, you can hear him, he says down, or he says he's down. He says that out loud so Petr Yan is aware that he can't do certain things to a grounded opponent, a downed opponent. Petr Yan is standing. Aljamain Sterling is grounded, crouched, knee on the ground, for several seconds. And to understand the grounded opponent thing, some people get confused with it used to be like 3 points of contact on the ground. That's no longer true. The unified rules were updated a few years ago. I actually tweeted a link and also put a link on the Writers and Fighters Facebook page to a video from YouTube where Big John McCarthy, referee, and helped write the unified rules and update the unified rules. He explains that downed opponent thing. It's a 5-minute video. He's downed. Having your knee down is one of those changes. It's not the 3 points of contact on the mat. It's no longer that. So it's an interesting video just so you can have that context. So take a look at that if you need further explanation. But in any case, Sterling is downed. And it's for several seconds, there's this weird moment that he knows he can't get attacked in certain ways. Like you can't get kicked or kneed when you're downed, when you're a grounded opponent. And so you hear somebody at cage side say, only punches, because Sterling is on a knee. And Petr Yan's corner says, only punches. So I think Petr Yan is going to tee off on him, like with his fists, which would work. Yan can be heard saying, I kick, ? Right? I kick, ? You can hear him question. He says it out loud because his corner can hear. There's no crowd, right? And as he's just pushing down on Sterling's head, while Sterling is crouched, again, to kind of control his head and neck, right? He's controlling him. And just as he's pushing down Sterling's head while Sterling is crouched to control his head, Petr Yan is holding Sterling's head down, and he says, I kick. But then you hear somebody say, yeah. And Yan just knees Sterling in the head and just about knocks him out. He's done. He's concussed. He's not blacked out, but he's not there. He's knocked goofy. Fight's over. But the fight isn't over. The ref takes a moment to talk to him. He calls for a break in the action. Sterling is rolling over. He just got kneed in the head at full force. Okay? And the referee talks to him, then the doctor, and waits about 3 minutes before he calls the fight over due to an illegal strike. And it's an intentional foul because the referee said down. He said he's down, which means you wrestle the guy, which means you can punch him, but you cannot kick him. You cannot knee him. And so I thought that was irresponsible of the ref to kind of be like, well, can he continue? Or because we saw that happen with John Jones and Anthony Smith. Again, that one was just way less egregious. I think it was a problem there, but this was clearly a downed opponent, announced and a downed opponent, and was still kneed in the head. The referee should have DQ'd him in about 5 seconds. Once you go and look over at Aljamain Sterling and see that he's not there, he's not even on this planet anymore, you got to wave off the fight. Petr Yan loses by disqualification. And so unfortunately, this means that the title changed hands. So Sterling wins the belt on a disqualification. Petr Yan said that, they told him to kick, so he did. The commentary team said that Khabib Nurmagomedov was at ringside, and he heard and told the commentary team that his corner said to kick him in Russian. But I don't know if that's true or a misinterpretation or something, because I saw some YouTube comments on this stuff, and some people were translating the Russian, or trying to, right? Russian speakers. And they said the translation when they were yelling at him was something more like hit him or beat him or strike him, which can be, interpreted for punching or kicking. But in any case, he should know, Petr Yan should know the rules. They go over the rules with translators in the locker room, so you know what the deal is. And so he should know the unified rules of mixed martial arts in the USA, because if you want to kick or knee a grounded opponent, there's places you can do that. Brazil, Russia, Japan, which have different governing bodies for the rules of mixed martial arts in their countries. But here you can't kick a down opponent. That's the rules. And so I think it's still on him. You can't put that on your corner or what you heard. You're the fighter there in the ring, in the cage. So that was an odd fight, an odd one. Next fight was Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson. And going into this, I thought Megan Anderson might have a little bit. I was still picking Nunes to win, but Megan Anderson's from Australia, and the podcast has a little following in Australia. So I was like, I wouldn't be mad if Megan pulls up some weird upset. She's a big girl. Megan Anderson is big she's a true featherweight, 145. Last year or year before, she did one of her weight cuts was a legit 25 pounds. She's big. She's 6 feet tall and strong and long. And I thought she might give her trouble with this reach, these kicks, the power. But it wasn't that way. Nunes just dominated Megan Anderson. It took, a minute or two. Stunned her with the right hand, got her down, hit some ground and pound, got a straight arm bar, and then moved into a reverse triangle, and Anderson had to tap. There's no way she was going to escape. She was just going to tap or pass out. So she didn't provide any opposition. Nunes was just totally steamrolled her. Totally did. The next fight was the main event, Israel Adesanya and Jan Blachowicz. Commentary on this one was biased. It was bugging me. I think Joe Rogan needs to retire from commentary, and he should be replaced with Rashad Evans, Michael Bisping, or Dan Hardy. I think Michael Bisping is the one to go with. Great talker, great personality, usually calls it right down the middle. For example, at one point, Joe Rogan was saying that Blachowicz was getting outstruck by Adesanya. And the way he delivers, it's the audience will accept this, right? Or he's the dominant voice on there because he has the most experience broadcasting versus Daniel Cormier and John Anik. So at one point, Rogan says that Blachowicz is getting outstruck by Adesanya. And there's a graphic on the screen that says the opposite, that Blachowicz was not getting outstruck. He was outstriking Adesanya in volume and accuracy. The numbers of punches and the percentage that land. And the fight was a clear win in my eyes for Blachowicz. So Izzy tried to go up one division and wasn't able to successfully. And there's a reason not everybody can be Amanda Nunes. There's very few double champs or champs, as they call it in the UFC. And only one person has ever actively defended 2 titles at the same time, and that's Amanda Nunes. She's on a 12-fight win streak. Israel Adesanya is great, but it just proved that not everybody can move to another division and dominate another division. It's hard. Even the double champions that there have been have never actively defended the 2 titles at the same time. And so Nunes is on a 12-fight win streak. 9 of those are championship fights. She's defended her 135 bantamweight belt 5 times and the 145 featherweight belt twice. She's the best in the world in 2 women's MMA divisions. And I would say she's easily the current best pound-for-pound MMA fighter in any gender, any organization, at any weight on the planet right now. Speaking of champions, I consider my next guest a champion at writing. Jennifer Murvin is a writer, a teacher, an independent bookstore owner. We're acquainted online through the writing world for a few years, and I've always admired her work, so it was nice to sit and have a conversation with her. So thanks for listening to the recap so far, and I hope you enjoy this interview. All right, y'all, I'm joined here by Jennifer Murvin. Jennifer Murvin works over at Missouri State University. She's a writer. One of the reasons I asked her on specifically is that she writes all sorts of stuff, not just one genre. Jennifer, thanks for coming on board.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled. Thank you.
Yeah, and so, again, I've kind of observed your writing for a good while now. I don't know how long. One of your pieces came through a journal I was working on, and so we became like friends online. One of those writer friends we had, we kind of see from a distance. But really,
I love those friends.
And so now I'm just like hitting them up for interviews and stuff. And so one of my big questions is, because I don't know you, like, how did you come to the writing thing? Like writing in like a serious way?
Yeah, it came later for me. I've always been a reader and just stuck in a book constantly, and still am. Reading is the most important thing in my life, next to, of course, my child, who I keep trying to get to read more too. But yeah, I had a very kind of meandering journey educationally. I started out at a small liberal arts college, wanting to be an elementary school art teacher because I've always loved art and always loved being around kids, and especially the way that kids approach art was always so inspiring to me, because there's this beautiful expression of joy. There's no self-consciousness about the way that kids do art. And so being close to that always made me feel so inspired. And then I kind of moved away from that and, thought, okay, I'll be a high school English teacher, and then kind of moved away from that. And then eventually, sort of got my degree in creative writing because that was sort of the quickest degree I could do in undergrad at that time. And I sort of graduated without an idea of what I wanted to do. I had taken a couple writing classes and I had published a short story as an undergrad, but I just kind of floated around a little bit, and I landed this amazing job out of undergrad writing educational comic books with the Chickasaw Nation. It was a grant way back in the early 2000s that gave the Chickasaw Nation sort of this chunk of money to develop educational materials for the kids. And so I wrote these educational comics. And that was a great gig for me for about 3 years. And when the grant ran out and that project sort of ended, I decided to go back to graduate school. And that's kind of when I started writing more seriously. I had always read, and because I was such a reader, I'm always so moved by books and literature. And in grad school, I was introduced to, just more experimental writing. I had a great teacher, Brian Shaver, who's a beautiful novelist, and he actually has a great craft book. He was just instrumental in kind of opening my eyes to some different literature that I hadn't really read. So yeah, that's kind of my weird little way into writing.
Yeah, well, good writers have that weird path to get to where we are, or else what the hell do you have to write about? Like,
right?
Having that straight path to like go to school and then become a writer. So all you have to write about is, I don't know, going to school and hanging out with other writers. I don't know. And so, yeah, I like that. And the beginning of what you talked about, that you had worked with, you wanted to be like a art teacher with kids, and because of their creativity. I did some like creative writing workshops with like a third to fifth grade. And they're the best poets. I mean, like no poet can touch them. I'm sorry. Like, it's just like they're just they haven't been taught, like, well, this is what a poem can't be, or whatever weird stuff we come up with as writers and the instruction that we get. But that creativity is almost limitless. So I admire that. I kind of miss getting in front of the little kids. High school, not so much, you know. High school, not so much.
Well, yeah, it's like there's some point in time, and I think it's different for each kid, but you know, they start having this awareness of other people's opinions, or, you know, Linda Berry calls it the 2 questions. Is this good? Does this suck? You know, and it's like, she has that great essay where she sort of talks about the moment that those 2 questions entered her life, and now it's just a constant battle against those 2 questions. And then she's constantly striving to get back to that innocent, just generation of art for art's sake, or just, you know, creativity for the fun of it in the moment, and not thinking about, because it is so hard. You get caught up in this idea of, you know, is what I'm writing good? Is it maybe going to be published? Are people going to like it, you know, approve of it? So yeah, I've always been so inspired by kids. And, you know, my son is 13 now. And when he was little, I just loved watching him draw and write. And I always teach Naomi Shihab-Nye's poem, One Boy Told Me, which is one of my favorite poems. And it's just a collage of things that kids say that you're so right. It's so poetic on accident. It's just my favorite. It's my great regret that I just didn't write down every single thing that Ethan said growing up.
And so I
came to that poem too late.
That point of like not worrying about what's going to be the end. You know, you're in step 1 to create something, to be creative, creation. And so you're in that first step, and kids don't give a shit. They'll just do it. Whereas I'm like, I can't put a word down unless it's going to be the right first word, and I'm just there looking at my computer for an hour. So for you, like, what kind of stuff, maybe it's reading, maybe it's other stuff, what helps you with that creation and invention part of your own work?
Definitely reading. I always read before I write, because it just gets you into the language of writing, you know, which is different than coming just from a conversation, or, you know, from listening to a podcast, or, you know, watching a movie or something. So I always try to open with reading, which I find helps me a lot. It gets me in like this trancy space.
Sure.
And then I mostly work from prompts. So I really, like, if I am just sitting down and I have all the subjects in the world at my fingertips, all the styles in the world at my fingertips, I find that very paralyzing. So I really love to sit down with a prompt that's very specific. So if I'm attempting a structure that's similar to something that I read that I really loved, or a point of view approach, or, you know, something like that, that really helps me. And I am taking a poetry class for the first time this semester, from a colleague, Marcus Cafagna, who's wonderful. And it's really fun with poetry, because I think with poetry, you do that so much more, where you maybe follow like a formal approach, and then the invention kind of happens within those strict parameters. I don't think we do that as much in prose. I mean, I certainly do. I've sort of self-imposed that, and then I impose that on my students.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of the way that I find writing happens best for me. So I write along with my students, less now that I teach online, which I'm finding a little upsetting. In person, when I would have my students write in class, I would always write, and something would always, if I start something, I tend to finish it. So that was always really helpful for my writing life. I've had to reimagine that in the last year. The last year has been very hard for me to write anything.
And so your writing process, you said, is mostly through prompts. And again, to give me a little bit of a limit, little bit of a parameter to operate within, right? And therein lies, like, you know, once we get, I don't want to say once we get good at this, but once we have enough experience at this. I always tell my students, I was like, I'm not a better writer than anybody here. I've just been doing it longer. Like,
yeah, we got the years behind
I was like, I just put in more time. You put in this much time, you'll catch up to me. Simple as that.
And think how many more years we've had to read, you know, that's feeding us every time. Yeah. That's the beautiful thing about being a writer, is you just get, aging just helps.
Yeah, for sure.
What else can you say that about?
Right, exactly. That, I mean, I'm always very skeptical, and there's great books by young authors, but there's lots of them. I'm like, you're that young and you put out this kind of a book, like what, and so I'm always kind of curious and skeptical of it, which is unfair, but whatever. And so you mentioned that things have gotten harder. So one of my questions here is like, how's COVID affected your writing? It's affected all of us in a number of ways, and we could go on and on, have a 3-hour podcast, but what about writing specifically, writing?
I think just, the disruption of sort of, and I've always been kind of right where you're at, I mean, I've moved a lot, I had a young child, I had my son when I was 26. And so, that was kind of at the very early years of my writing life. And so, I kind of I always felt sort of proud of myself that I could kind of write on the go or be flexible in my writing. But this past year, I don't know. I think my mind is just it wanders a lot more. I've even had a harder time focusing on reading in the last year, which is very weird for me. Thankfully, in the last couple months, I feel I've been able to kind of get back to my normal way that I read. So I've had to sort of force myself to do it more than I normally would. Like, say, okay, today, this afternoon, I'm working on this. I was very fortunate that at the beginning of this month, a friend of mine solicited an essay for the Essay Daily feature. It was part of their Midwest Essay series. So writing about, being an essay, teaching or reading or writing the essay in the Midwest. And what does that mean to you? And it was really good to have like a very specific prompt. It had to be short. It had to be about writing about the Midwest, and it was due in a month.
Nice.
And so something about that, I wrote, and it felt so good. I finished something. I really worked on it hard, like every afternoon. I was very focused on it. And so I think that's the way I'm going to have to do it from now on, is just really kind of impose some deadlines on myself. And, normally my classes will do that for me, but teaching online is just a little different,
Yeah.
It's very strange. Yeah.
And so I've observed my own weird issue, and it's concerning to me that like I can't read as effectively. And it's just a fact. And I actually was dealing with that before this pandemic crisis. And, I'm like, I read and write for a living, and I teach it. And it's probably the only reason I can still do it. But like, there's like this writer's block, but I've developed this weird like reader's block where it's hard for me to get. I just can't. It's quite difficult. And I'm like, I'm trained at this. I'm good at this. My students must be drowning when it comes to like focused reading. Something as simple and fundamental to their college and our lives. It's a nightmare right now. I can't lie. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've kind of pivoted some of my reading myself and with my assignments to my students to listening to podcasts, which I think is great, and listening to audiobooks, which maybe can help, and maybe they can do it while I'm spending a lot more time at home, obviously. So, I find myself cleaning more or, walking the dogs more. And so just kind of trying to feed my brain with that in different ways, and trying to find new ways to just get that material in.
Yeah.
Trying to diversify that.
I've tried a little bit of that too with my students. Instead of doing like, oh, we're going to read like 4 articles this week. It's like, well, let's read 2 articles and watch a TED Talk and listen to an interview. Right?
Yeah.
And a podcast, these kinds of things. And I'm like, language is language. English, as much as we're like, we're the arts and all this stuff. We are, but we're also in the field of communications. It's not lie, right? And this is fundamental stuff. And so right now, me too. I every book I buy in the past like 6-7 months, I buy the book, hard copy. Then I also buy the audio, and I buy every book twice now because I have to hear it as I read along. And it helps. Yeah. And I'm sorry, it helps. I'll do whatever I need to compensate right now.
Yeah, it does help a lot. And I love that we live in a time where, we can watch writers that we love and admire give interviews, and easily just, search them and watch lots of interviews on YouTube, or listen to a long interview on Being,
Sure.
It's like incredible to have this resource. And then I think that helps students invest more in the books. because they get maybe a little bit more context, or they really connect with the person, the author themselves, which I'm finding more and more is important to my students.
Yes.
So yeah, I think like, especially if the writer themselves is reading the book, I think that's an extra bonus.
Oh yeah, that's great.
So I know that's not always the case because they have great audiobook actors.
Yeah. And some of them are great and some of them are like, not so, but there's some that are just tremendous. I was like, this is a great storyteller just reading me a good one.
I was going to say too, like something about writing in this time, I found myself writing shorter form things.
Okay.
So like more flash. And then I decided one of my reasons for taking this poetry class this semester, which is kind of unusual for me. I haven't really in a full semester teaching load, like added a class that I'm taking on my own. But part of it was to just get me writing more. So I'm sort of just finding ways to sort of get myself into it. And so taking a class, again, has been sort of helpful because I'm,
those built-in deadlines and you have to produce.
Yes, they're built-in deadlines or expectations. I want to do well. And so, like these, normally I teach at a really beautiful writing community called the River Pretty Writers Retreat. I've taught with them for, like 10 years. We have a retreat twice a year down in Tecumseh, Missouri, like deep in the Ozark woods, like by the White River. It's so beautiful there. And so normally twice a year, I have these 3-day weekends where it's all writing prompts, writing workshops, guest lectures, and I just sit and I write and I get all these great ideas. And I haven't had that. We had to cancel our April 2020 retreat, our fall retreat, and our spring retreat this coming spring. Dang. And I didn't realize how important that twice a year sort of 3-day chunk. And I always teach it that too. So I'm always kind of prepping and that, that helps me write too. That was all gone. And so I think that I hadn't really recognized the importance of that just twice a year, little 3-day thing. I mean, it's not a huge, long period of time, but it's very intensive while you're there in like this really inspiring way. And I think that that's affected me. I got kind of used to that for 10 years. I got very spoiled.
Well, if you did it for that long and a couple times a year, that's a pretty frequent routine for something quite unique. Because as well as I do, and I tell my students that want to be writers, that like want to do it for real, I tell them like, it's hard to have this environment again where we all kind of want to write and we're all reading each other's stuff. And I was like, that you have to seek that out. Like once you're out of this academic system where we teach you writing and you're off on your own, I was like, you got to find these opportunities in retreats and workshops like the ones that you participate in and teach. So I think that, and again, you benefit from that too, because it keeps you plugged into that thing that we're supposed to do.
Yeah, it is. It's such a connection. And I mean, and we have kind of a core group of writers that are always sort of the core faculty. And I'm very fortunate enough to be part of that core faculty. But then we bring in guest authors in every genre. So we have, every time it's this new idea, it's this, new writer, a new way of teaching. And I get to sort of watch all of that unfold and be in that community. And I really miss it. I really am hoping we can get back for fall. And
I
you should come down for that sometime. I think you'd really love it.
It's one of those, I do want to do a little bit more of that kind of stuff. Again,
it's a good group of people.
Because it's hard for me. I got my friends and readers and stuff and relationships and everything like that.
Yeah.
But again, fresh eyes, that environment, it's one of those things like, I got to be a student again. Like I'm feeling that in me. Like I got to be a student again with the writing thing. I'm going to join a boxing gym soon again, just because I'm like, I need to be, I need to be in the position to be a novice. Because in front of our students, we're not, right? Like that's such a big chunk of our lives. And so I was like, but I still consider myself quite a young writer, quite young in my career. And so
Same.
I'm like, I'm still a beginner, so I need to go continue to develop. And so opportunities like that are quite interesting to me. So poetry, you also do fiction, but then you do graphic storytelling. I think all prose writers should read poetry and vice versa, all that stuff. I think they borrow from each other, gives you certain skills. But graphic storytelling, there is less of that. There's less emphasis on that kind of stuff in undergrad and master's programs and so on. Is there a bunch of research and academic stuff and people doing great things? Yeah, sure. But it is a little bit more unique than the people we run into in our circles. So tell me about the graphic storytelling thing, because I'm a fan of that stuff. I like, for example, Leslie Marmon's Silko Storyteller. Has photographs in it, and then Frederick Louis Aldama has a book, Long Stories Cut Short, that has artwork in it. Picked up a poetry collection, W. Todd Kaneko's Dead Wrestler Elegies, and there's like cartoon artwork of like the wrestlers he's writing about. I'm trying to write a photo essay, and so I'm super curious about, because you do it well, and I want to talk about a specific piece in a moment. But tell me about that graphic storytelling.
I came to it late and kind of in a surprising way. I always loved graphic narrative. I loved graphic novels, graphic memoirs. I just found it very moving and exciting to look at. It's just beautiful and interesting. My son, the first books that he really loved were all comics. I mean, he still reads Calvin and Hobbes. I'm like, our Calvin and Hobbes book is beat. It's just like falling apart.
That's good.
It's so beautifully loved. And there's just something so attractive and appealing to me about reading it. It's challenging, it's different. And if you broaden sort of your sense of what graphic narrative is, it's any kind of combination of text and a visual. So photography, collage, illustrations along with your text. Maybe it's not like a traditional sort of paneled graphic narrative, but it has visuals, and that creates a different kind of reading experience. This all excites me. I really love hybrid works. I love things that are just interesting and creative. As a prose writer, I'm always drawn to borrowed forms, which has a very close relationship with graphic narrative in my mind. I taught it a lot. I started a comics program where I teach. I started a comics class. It was just introduction to graphic narrative. And we just wrote and read. And then I partnered with my dear friend, Cole Klosser, who started teaching at Missouri State, who's a cartoonist. And we proposed a interdisciplinary comics class where we both teach it. And it wasn't like I teach writing one day and he teaches art one day and we really separate it. It's like all our kids are in the same classroom. We both teach every day and just really highlight how everything is very integrated. It's not art over here and writing over here. And it's not the writer's right and the artist. Cole always says the writer's right and the artist's art. We're not doing that. Everyone has to do it. Everyone has to do their own. And so I thought, if I'm making my students do this, I have to do one myself. And I've always drawn, I've always done artistic things, but I had never really tried my hand formally at illustrating something that I had written. And so I did it. And it was really terrifying and hard. And it took me 100 years. It's a long, oh my gosh, cartooning is hard. Just the sheer amount of hours you spend on this short piece. But I loved it, and now I can't stop doing it. I'm working on a much longer graphic essay right now that's about 10 pages, and it's a longer piece that I've been kind of working on through the quarantine very slowly. Hopefully sometime I'll finish it. So I just started kind of submitting my own work and kind of writing and drawing along with my students. Again, that class is a 2-hour and 45-minute studio art class.
Sure. So,
we'd write, we'd talk, and then we give everybody time to work on their stuff. And I would sit and draw, and I'd work with my students, and, they were drawing, I was drawing, Cole was drawing. And I miss that space of just that room where we're all just sitting and drawing and writing and talking. But it was just energizing. And like you said, I am always so energized anytime I'm learning about something. And so I just love teaching that class because when Cole was talking, I was the student. And then I was learning to teach, and then I was learning how to do it. Great. So it's really kind of opened up this whole new thing. And then I'm really proud to say that we just this fall started offering a full sequential art track in the Department of Art and Design. So it's one of the few bachelor's programs. Like you said, it's kind of niche. You see a lot more programs on the master's level in sequential art, but not so much on the undergraduate. Right. So we offer a Bachelor of Fine Arts with a sequential art track. And then our students in the English department, if they want to be English majors, they can get a certificate in graphic narrative that can show that they have, this extra sort of skill set.
No, that's that interdisciplinary element. Again, it's like we think that writing is disconnected from the rest of the world and everything. Well, no, it's intertwined with all that shit. Like I remember taking in undergrad. Once I started taking the creative writing classes and things start to kind of go well, and professor kind of realizes I'm serious and things like this. I was like a senior, and he's like, "Hey, I got this graduate level class we put together. It's interdisciplinary. We want half writers and half composers from the music department, and you guys are going to write libretto. You guys are going to write opera. You want to do it?" And he was wanting to throw me into a serious environment with like people like older than me, more like more serious than what was going on in the undergrad class. I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And it was just a really great experience. That okay, well, we're writing, and then okay, two of y'all will pair up with this composer, and then put music to our stuff and collaborate. It was amazing. Yeah, not the visual art thing, but again, that interdisciplinary element of like, like the literature I've studied and the stuff I've jotted down like can go over here now. That's like another place for it. That was really eye-opening for me. And again, one of the really cool experiences that put me on that path to be like, okay, I do need to be around people at the graduate level that I'm only taking stuff that's English related and writing related, I want to come to one specific piece that it's why I reached out to you. I mean, I only invite people on this podcast that are better writers than me. And so,
my God,
I literally, like, otherwise, again, because I have to be, like, I have to learn something while I'm providing this to my audience. And so I selfishly invite you. So Jennifer, you had this piece called Lifeguard. It's a graphic piece in Anomaly. It's a beautiful little piece, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I want you to tell me a little bit about that piece. I think it's super dope. Tell me a little bit about that.
Thank you. I had kind of written that little short story. It's a little flash story a long time ago. And when I was looking for just different things I could maybe try out in graphic narrative, that one stood out to me as one that might be fun and interesting to do visually too. Mm-hmm. And the drawings are from sort of different places around home. I grew up in Southern California, and my dad was born and raised in Long Beach, and would always tell sort of, stories about going out and swimming in the morning. And so, I sort of took a lot of creative liberties, but I sort of always imagined like my dad going out swimming, in the morning before school. And, back in the 60s, Long Beach was a little bit different than it is now. So I don't know. And my grandmother, was sort of the inspiration for this. She was kind of a feisty person, and always kind of had an attitude, So it's all very fictional, but kind of inspired by some non-fictional things.
And so that brings up, that's one of those things, people ask, well, is this autobiographical? You hear that at a reading and some at the Q&A, and I just roll my eyes. Oh, here we go again. Because it's like, well, everything is part of me. What are you talking about? I wrote it. Of course it's part of me. But it's like, okay, well, I took this little moment or this character, this voice, grandma, or fictionalize it, all this stuff. But what remains real and true, and you brought it up, was place. And Santa Ana, the valley, as it were, right?
I grew up in Simi Valley.
Right. Exactly. And so I hear valley, I think Texas, Rio Grande Valley, because that's our thing. And so I know that the valley is a place. I'm aware of it even just from, I saw it in this piece, and then also in the tremendous piece, fucking powerful piece in a diagram, Your Mom is Hot. That piece was great.
You.
And that the Santa Ana thing and that the place thing, comes through all that other really great stuff but I'm like, there's this really underlying strength and foundation of place in this graphic little piece, and then this very personal piece from Diagram.
Thank you for saying that.
What about place? What about place and writing and that stuff?
I think, to me, place is culture and culture is everything. So, you know, to me, it's everything, you know? So, yeah. So, and there are things that, you know, culturally are tied to place, like very specifically.
100%.
And being somebody that, you know, grew up in sort of this very particular place in California, all my family was like diehard Californians. You know, my grandmother came from Wisconsin. She was one of 10 kids, came out to San Francisco when she was 17 and swore never to go back to Wisconsin. I mean, that woman was the most in love person with California I've ever seen. She just loved it. She would never go back to Wisconsin. And then I moved to Missouri. And so my relationship with California changed. And I feel like coming and going from there, I had more of an awareness of what I was noticing and differences. And so sort of almost moving away made me see it more clearly. My sister pointed out to me the other day that I've been in Missouri now an equal amount of time than I lived in California.
Sure.
And I was sort of like, didn't quite know what to do with that information because I still very much consider myself a Californian, but I live and work and raise my child in the Ozarks. So that was something that I kind of funneled into my Midwest essay.
Yeah, no,
my little short piece for Essay Daily too.
No, that Midwest essay was super cool, and I love that it was about your students. That's really cool. Yeah, the idea of place and leaving home, the place that you call home, not where you were born, the place you call home for whatever reason, like you know, and I'm a Texas boy, and I end up in Utah, and you know, even not even leaving Texas, but leaving El Paso, far west Texas, right? And then going to central Texas. That's a world away with a different culture and everything. I remember one of my friends read some of my stories, and they all take place in Texas and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I write a lot about this and that, whatever. At one point he says, and they all take place in different cities, and I'm doing like air quotes right now. But he tells me, and he's not from El Paso, he goes, but aren't they all El Paso? And I'm like, yes, you're right. You're right. Yeah. And I was just like almost weirdly trying to resist. It's just the name I changed. But it's like, you're writing about home, dude. Like, what are you doing? And there's a reason for that, because home's important to me, and culture and leaving gave me that lens to see what maybe was right under my nose for years.
Oh, that's exactly, yes. You put it perfectly right there. And I also enjoy writing about California because I miss it. And so writing about it allows me to spend time there, you know, think about my family, who I miss all the time. So yeah, it's almost like writing about California just makes me feel a little closer to home too. I mean, even the things that aren't great about it, you know, just spending time with it. Yeah.
Part of the move to Missouri ends up with you being a business owner and having a bookstore, an independent bookstore. Tell me about Pagination. What was the impetus for that bookstore? What kind of started that whole project? That's awesome. I'm curious.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am really proud of Pagination. I honestly, I did not think through it very carefully at all. It was very impulsive. I tend to sort of like get really passionate and excited about something, and once I'm like in it, I throw myself in it 1,000,000%. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but it just is sort of kind of what I've done. So I just, you know, my fiance and I, Coop, who's my partner in the shop too, we had gone to see George Saunders up in St. Louis. And we had gone to like Left Bank Books, and, you know, we just had so much fun. We went to Subterranean Books and just did like our book tour and
bunch of nerds,
had a great time. Oh, we're such nerds. It's like the best.
It's great.
You know, spend all the money we don't have and suitcase space we don't have on books. So, we came home, and Springfield is a great little town. Like, we're a college town. We're about 180,000 people in like city proper. It's a big college town. Missouri State's, 28,000 people. It's a big place. And we have a lot of bookstores in town, but they're mostly used bookstores. So our one new bookstore is Barnes and Noble. And so, Coop and I were like, man, it's a shame we don't have something like Left Bank Books here, and I was like, why don't we start one? And so we just kind of like, we're talking about it in kind of this hypothetical way. And then sort of, I drove by this old historic home on Walnut Street, which is kind of the downtown historic area in Springfield. There's a lot of like great restaurants and bars and like bed and breakfasts, and and they're all of them on this particular part of the street are businesses housed in these old historic homes. And so this, of course, Spanish Mission style, super California looking house,
cool,
came up on the market. And it's like stucco. It just had everything that sort of spoke to me for home.
Nice.
And I walked in and it had this big open room, and I was like, this is perfect. And of course I had no idea what I was getting into at all. I had no idea we're going to have to spend 9 months renovating the house to get it up to commercial code. I learned a lot about contractors and permits and all that. So it was sort of like the idea came before the passion, came before all the practical stuff. But thankfully we were able to pull it off. We definitely opened way later than I planned. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was something that I thought was an extension of my life as a reader. Bookstores have always been my first place I go when I visit anywhere. They're my happy place. Bookstores and libraries always have been. And it's so much fun. I wanted to have a place. Part of my love of River Pretty, the writing retreat, is that it's open to everybody. And so I wanted to recreate that in Springfield because there are so many people that want to write, but aren't in like you said, like this academic setting of a classroom. And so I thought my shop could be a place where that could happen. We could have book clubs, we could have open mic nights, and it's open to everyone who wants to just be creative. So I'm missing that with the pandemic because we can't really have events, but
yeah, that was one of my
questions. We're
going
to go back to it.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, yeah. and it's great that it's a bookstore. You can grab your books and stuff and skip Scamazon, right, and get them from you.
Yes, important.
Yeah, but you also provide the space for readers and writers to do their thing, open mic nights, readings, and things like this. But COVID has changed that. How else has it changed, like, business?
There's a lot more like online ordering versus people coming into the shop, which is definitely a preferred and safe way of doing things. I find myself communicating a lot more with my customers and readers, like on Facebook Messenger, Instagram, more than before,
Sure.
Where I would see everybody at least once a month at book club or once a month that we would have a poetry discussion and open mic night. So we'd always pick a poet, we do handouts and discuss the poems for like in half an hour to 45 minutes. And then we would have our poetry open mic night or whatever anybody wanted to read. It wasn't just poetry. People could sing songs or whatever they wanted to do. But yeah, so a lot of it's moved online. We've, of course, pivoted some of our author events online. So we've had, virtual events. I'm really ready to go back to being in person. I do want to keep an online component, like where if an author comes into the shop, I will Zoom it because I really don't want to lose that accessibility. That's something I have loved as a reader. There's so many more readings I can attend now because they're on Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
So I definitely want to keep that, but also have the in-person component. So we're going to try our first in-person event that we have scheduled tentatively is in the end of April, and it's going to be an outdoor reading.
Cool.
So we're going to sort of see how that goes.
Okay.
We have a big backyard, so we're going to have like picnic blankets and have the reader sort of up on like a little like wooden, short like little thing, but kind of elevate her a bit with a mic, and then everyone will have picnic blankets and sort of be out in the yard.
Oh, that's such a cool image. Yeah, that's dope.
Yeah, I love it. It's talk about being a novice. I am, even after, this 9 months of like doing the house, remodeling the whole thing, and then like running a bookstore for a year, and then the pandemic where you're sort of pivoting to online. I am so grateful. Indie booksellers are the most generous human beings on the planet. My indie booksellers group on Facebook is like, it's like a family.
That's
and they
good.
just want everybody to succeed because we are all so passionate about books.
That's awesome.
So it's a good place to be when you're struggling, because you're struggling with, other great passionate artists people.
One of the ways I think that was cool that I saw on the Pagination website was that you were very deliberate about supporting local people through the artwork inside, graphic designers, getting the furniture from a local shop, those kinds of things. Why? Tell me a little bit about that. Like, why? You could have just furnished the place with like IKEA and Target, right? Like, why not?
Well, full disclosure, our bookshelves are from IKEA.
Whose aren't, though, at the end of the day, really?
Yeah.
But tell me, I think that's great, though, that really to be like, okay, well, we're a local place. We're going to be local.
Yeah.
And so how, and it seemed very deliberate.
We definitely were. Like, I love to thrift. I love local shops. There's a beautiful furniture store right down the street from our shop on Walnut called Cricket in the House, where we got a lot of furniture from there. I just felt like I wanted it to be personal. I wanted it to be different and unique. My student, Ariel Messer, who's a beautiful illustrator who I had in my comics class, she did all this muraling in the house. I mean, it's stunning. She spent probably 2 months just up on a ladder, doing this beautiful muraling. And then my dear friend Cole, who I mentioned earlier, who I teach comics with, as a gift to us, designed our logo. And he's an incredible illustrator, and he does this gorgeous lettering, and it looks like this kind of old timey. It was perfect. When we saw it, I cried. I mean, it's just gorgeous. And so Ariel, on the back of our shop, there were two. I mean, I tell you, this house was made for a bookstore. It was just, there were two open kind of panels in this built-in woodwork on the ceiling, and Pagination Bookshop just
fits
fit.
Perfect.
It was like, we couldn't have planned it. I mean, it just was sort of meant to be. And then when we first opened, I had an Airbnb upstairs, because there's a beautiful upstairs area that's like 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and 2.5 baths. It's a huge house. And so I had it as a sleep above a bookshop was our Airbnb, but it was just kind of too much to do. And now I'm glad I kind of transitioned away from that with the pandemic. But now we have 3 other female-owned small businesses upstairs. Oh, cool. And so the whole building is just female-owned small businesses. That's awesome. It's a great energy. So yeah, like we have a local, Ariel does some of our cards. We also have a local artist, Doug Erb, that does some of our cards. So anything I can do locally, I do.
That's awesome. I think it's great that you got like independent women business owners there.
Yeah.
My sister's one, and I know again,
cool.
Being a business owner and being a woman, you have to be a hustler, and you can't take shit and everything like that, and that's the only way you make it, unfortunately. And she, so seeing that and how hard it is to start a little business and all this stuff, but that also you lean on maybe the people that you trust and that you like and want to support. And hey, I have this artist paint some stuff. A friend of mine's hooking me up our logo. Those kinds of things. Like my awesome badass logo for this podcast. That was my sister's friend and graphic designer that did her work. And
awesome.
He barely charged me. He barely charged me. It was criminal how cheap I got the deal. Because he's quite talented. But that's he was like, okay, like I'm doing this because I love you. And I'm like, all right, dude, thank you. And I just have to pay it forward. That's all we can do when we get those people throwing 100%. You a bone. It's like, all I got to do is hook somebody up later,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key. And it's, we have great local authors here. Like the Ozarks is a really interesting place for literature and art and music. And we're part of the art walk that happens downtown. And so we had a great photographer, we had his stuff up in the shop for a month, and he did like a guest talk about his photography. I mean, it's just, It's so much fun. I really do miss that aspect of it. I can't wait to get back to it. When I envision the bookstore, bookstores are so much more than just a place to buy books, as you said. Like, it's a place to gather and talk about books. And like, again, I always go back to like how much kids just inspire me so much, but like kids will just run into our kids' book room and they'll like pull all the books off the shelf and they'll just put them out on the floor. And like, they just own the space. And it's like, read me this, read me this, read me this. And they'll come show me their books.
Love it.
And I just love it. And to have a space where that can happen is, and libraries, of course, are always the place where that can happen too.
Sure.
But I just love that there's like another little place that they can call like their book home or whatever. They bring their little tote bags.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
No, and it just I can't imagine. And I spent time in like libraries or crawling around and looking at the books at the Barnes and Noble. My parents are taking me, stuff like this. But the library, it's like, well, that's a government building. Like you're in a cool home that feels homey and artsy. This is so cool. It's awesome. Yeah, it is a home. And that was something I really wanted to do. I wanted to have it in a house. And I have ideas we have a big so the house was built in 1905. And then the carriage house behind the house was built in 1901. And so that's going to be a whole other renovation project. But I do have sort of the long-term goal of renovating that into like a venue for like separate book clubs or sure.
Writing, like little writing workshops.
For sure.
Or kids' birthday parties or something like that.
Cool.
Yeah, we actually have this really amazing little closet under the stairs that we used to have as the Harry Potter cupboard under the stairs, but now we've remade it into a hobbit hole. And it's all Lord of the Rings themed. And so like you walk in and it's just kind of this magical little nook and kids will just go in there and close the door.
That's so cool.
Like, this is my space now. And the parents are like, time to go, guys.
That's so cool.
Really
you make it that welcoming and that their environment is just as enriching as the words on those pages. That's awesome.
Oh, I hope so. That's my hope. It's really fun. And since Coop and I both work full time, our person at the shop is Shane, who is my former student. He actually graduated with his master's from the English department at Missouri State. And so it's so fun to like have my student, who is such an incredible writer and reader himself, like running this shop day to day. He's so great and he's so invested in the store and in what we do. And so it's like a family there. Good. He calls it team pagination, which I just absolutely love. So whenever we have like something bad happen or something good happen, he goes like team pagination. So it does feel like a family place. And, this is a small, large town. So whenever I do work the shop on Sundays, or whenever I come in, like I always see someone I know, and it's really fun, especially these days where you don't really see anybody.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
cool, awesome, great.
Yeah.
And so what I kind of want to wrap up with here now is, since it's the Writers and Fighters podcast, and you are a writer, I'll invert this question here at the end. Have you ever done any like fight training? Are you a fan of any like combat sports? I know we're talking about books and art and reading and whatnot, but I'm always curious.
I've listened to your past podcasts.
How dare you?
Yeah, I was like, I just know I have never done anything like that. My grandfather, so I grew up with my grandfather living with us from when I was 6 until he passed away, until I was a senior in high school. And he was a huge boxing fan.
Nice.
And so I always grew up sort of whenever I would go out, because he lived in a small guest house that he and my parents built in our backyard. And every day I would go out and walk to see Papa, and I would just sit on the couch and we'd have me get him a drink, and then we'd just sit and we'd watch boxing. But could I tell you like who we were watching or what we were doing? No, but whenever I hear people talking about boxing, it just takes me right back to that time with my Papa in the backyard.
That's
and
great.
Like he would just yell at the TV. It was always on. It was like just kind of his background, and he'd get so invested. And I asked my dad last night, I was like, Dad, I'm going to be on this podcast. There's a question about fighters. Like, who is Papa's favorite boxer? We ended up having like this really great little exchange about my grandfather, and Dad was like, how much do you want to know? I was like, I don't know, but it was kind of this great, we just talked about Papa a little bit last night. So thank you for that question, because I've been thinking about him a lot, because actually the last poem that I wrote for my poetry class I'm taking was kind of about a moment with my grandfather in his house, and there's boxing going on the TV in the background.
Holy shit, that's phenomenal. That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So I wish I knew more. Now after listening to several of your podcasts, I feel like I'm missing out on this whole exciting world and really cool people, like really cool people.
Oh, I've been fortunate in that the folks I get on are just really just cool, sharp.
They're so cool.
Yeah. It's just like so cool.
And
so because this podcast, it's like, I do reach out to friends that I know. But I also reach out to acquaintances like you, and then I reach out to strangers, and the fighters I reach out to are quite happy and explain a world that not a lot of people are plugged into, right? Even me, I was never competitive. Like, that's a different freaking level. I was a kid and I was training in martial arts gyms. That's different. That's completely different. And so it's been, as a fight fan, even there it's been part of my life forever. I sit and I'm listening, and again, it's like, I'm a beginner. You have so much to teach me.
Yeah.
But
they're so open about their stories and like so honest about their process and their journey. Like, I really have enjoyed listening, and I feel like this is such an incredible world.
I think it's cool that, again, you think that, hey, I don't know about boxing, not too aware or plugged into it.
Yeah.
But there's a very real connection there with Grandpa that.
Very
and again,
real.
I'm just guessing ages and stuff. He was probably when like they were showing boxing on network television. Like, you could watch it on normal TV instead of HBO, or spend $100 to order it or whatever. That it just came 100%, on TV.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was just on. Yeah. And sometimes he would like buy a fight. Like, I remember
a big one,
my uncle would come over, and like my dad and my papa and my uncle would like watch a fight that they had bought, and it was kind of like a big event when they would do that. Like, they come into the main house.
Right. We need the bigger TV now.
Yeah, we need the bigger TV for the fight. But and so like it was just kind of I don't know why I wasn't so plugged in or aware. I was sort of like floating, through the world. But it was always, and I always connect him to that, and it's always a part of it. And it was neat to sort of chat with my dad for a sec about that last night.
No, it's cool. Again, because it's a very cultural thing. And then in California specifically, like there's a lot of great boxers that come out of there, great gyms, things like that. So that's not surprising that if you all were there, the time, the old school grandpa, masculine, like that's the thing.
Oh yeah. He was super old school. Yeah. He like rode his motorcycle.
Oh yeah.
to the Planet GM every day when my dad was growing up.
That's great. See, I almost mentioned, and I was wrong though, because when you said Springfield, and I thought, I'm a motorcycle guy, I was like, Indian motorcycles are made in Springfield. I was like, oh no, but Massachusetts, not Missouri.
Yeah, different Springfield.
Different Springfield. I was like, I don't even know my motorcycle history, but it's not a motorcycle podcast, so it's okay.
Yeah.
All right, Jen, I enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, me too. This was so great. Thank you.
I admire you as a writer. I want you to keep
right back
going,
at you.
I want you going upwards and onwards. Tell the folks listening how they can find you and the bookstore. Yeah, what kind of social media plugs you got?
Oh, sure. We're everywhere. So and fortunately, Pagination Bookshop is kind of a unique name. So if you just Google Pagination Bookshop, you'll find us. But we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. And then my website is just jennifermurvin.com, and I have a link to the shop on my website too. So find me on social media. I really love social media. It's been so helpful, and it's a great community in so many ways, especially in these last, several months. I've just found it such a wonderful way to connect to readers. And I've been really grateful for social media has a lot of terrible things about it too.
Sure,
but
sure.
if you can take advantage of the good things, it can be very good. So yeah, I hope people reach out to us at Pagination. That would be awesome.
No, yeah, definitely. We will direct people to your website and to the bookstore all over social media, and hopefully sell some books.
Yeah, and we'll redirect back to your podcast too. This is such an amazing project. I love it, and I've really enjoyed listening to the episodes, and I'm just so grateful you asked me to be on it. So thank you. This was lovely.
I know. I appreciate it. So yeah, get some more stuff done and everything. We'll have you back on.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
You
good.
take care.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye. All right. Thank you, podcast audience, for listening to that awesome interview. If you want to keep up with Jennifer Murvin and her writing, you can read more of that through her website, www.jennifermurvin.com. Go check out the bookshop online. They got an online store, paginationbookshop.com. Pagination Bookshop is also on Twitter, Pagination Books on Twitter, Pagination Books on Twitter. Over on Facebook and Instagram, it's Pagination Bookshop. On Facebook and Instagram, Pagination Bookshop. If you want to keep up with the podcast, it's writersandfighters.com. Want to keep up with my stuff, ayortega.net. Make sure you follow us on social media. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Next week's episode, I got somebody from the fight world, a talented friend of mine, a pro wrestling videographer, my cameraman buddy, TJ Corison, next week. All right, y'all. I enjoyed this one. Keep listening, and I'll keep casting the pods. Be good, be safe, take care of each other.